Hey guys, I wanted to make an episode talking about why James Joyce's allusions are so dang good. So, if you need a quick reminder, an allusion is basically a reference to another text, historical event, usually something like biblical or Homer's Odyssey or whatever. And literature, generally speaking, is completely riddled with them. I can pretty much guarantee you that you've read something at some point which talked about some kind of journeys, or maybe you saw a character lying on the ground in the shape of a cross, or maybe you heard about a Tower of Babel or somebody sacrificing themselves with a crown of thorns, right? So when it comes to works, literature is just riddled with them. Now, some works, like let's say Paradise Lost by John Milton, that in particular is basically an entire work of allusion because it's basically building off of biblical literature and the building blocks of the Bible itself and creating an entire text and world creation based off of the allusions that it makes. But James Joyce actually adds different layers to illusion, and this is what this episode is actually all about. So, before I get into it, I need to explain a little bit about Lacan's theory of language. Lacan is a famous French psychologist, and he built his ideas of the human mind based off of a few principles. One of the most important principles for him is something called the object petit a. It basically translates to an innate longing or a drive for something. And this drive and this longing actually happens at the same exact time that language is developed. To him, language has a few really essential principles. And among these actually include that language is created out of necessity, out of this absence or lack. So let me give you a quick example. Let's say you are hungry and you are completely unlanguaged. You have no language for it. Well, you are lacking food. So what happens is you are creating this word in order to get the thing that you are lacking or the thing that is absent. In the English context, you're going to create the word hungry because it's taught to you that you reach for something and then some parental figure or whatever is basically telling you, hey, look, hungry. In any other context, you might create another word. So building on this idea of absence and lack, Lacan takes the idea even further, and he basically says that language gets its meaning through two things, basically metaphor and metonymy. So metonymy, by the way, just a quick reminder, is when a part references the whole. So if you say like 14 sails entered the harbor, basically there were 14 ships that went into the harbor. So we basically create language two ways. Not only is it created through the absence and the lack of something, but it's also created through association. One other little key quick principle is that oftentimes the inverse is immediately presented in that word. This is something that Derrida and deconstruction really elaborate on. So, for example, the word hungry and not hungry are forever kind of tied together. Even if we don't have a very specific word for it, there's kind of an assumption that the opposite of that word exists. But, anyways, so what does this all have to do with Joyce? Well, Joyce regularly uses associations and allusions to create meaning in the text, just the same way as language creates meaning in real life. Let's explore this in a phrase: no more turn aside and brood. This is from Telemachus, and a quick reminder of the context here. The first time it is uttered, Buck Mulligan is saying this, kind of mocking Stephen's grief as he walks down the stairs of Martello Tower, and no more turn aside and brood upon love's bitter mystery. So Mulligan at this moment is actually defensively entrenching himself in his belief that Stephen's grief is incredibly excessive. And he slyly escapes downstairs and starts preparing breakfast with Haynes. And the poem, by the way, the No More Turn Aside and Brood, this actually comes from the poem Who Goes with Fergus. This is by William Butler Yeats from the play The Countess Kathleen, and William Butler Yeats also wrote that play. A few moments later, readers actually find Stephen repeating these exact lines in his own internal monologue. Now, remember, words get their meaning through association and comparison. So, for instance, if I ask you to pick up a glass of water, you only know what a glass of water is based off of what it is not. So it is not a jug of flowers or a stein of beer. So as a result, because of those points of references, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What James Joyce is doing here is he is juxtaposing the various wholes to the part of the line. Let's walk through this. Let's say you are reading the No More Turn Aside and Brood line for the first time, and you are an educated reader that just so happened to see the play The Countess Kathleen, or maybe you read it in one of your classes, right? Immediately when you read it, you know that first association. Now, Joyce adds another layer of meaning when Buck Mulligan repeats that line. And what ends up happening is now you have two layers of meaning: the original meaning from the Countess Kathleen, and it's layered with Buck Mulligan's mocking meaning, him mocking Stephen's grief. There's an additional layer here too, and this actually comes from line 264, and this is when Stephen says it to himself. So he's lost in the phantasmal mirth of his mother, thinking about all these memories of his mother, wondering where these memories are going to be when she's gone and he's carrying them on. So where are these memories going to be and where is she when he's going to be gone? And he, like us, at this exact moment on line 264, he's processing three layers of meaning. The first one, we have the original use of Yeats. The second one, we have Mulligan's use. And the third one, we have the reflective evaluation of his own grief. And he's also denying Mulligan's assertion that his grief is excessive and unjustified. And just a quick note here, like if you're wondering, well, like, how do I know that Stephen isn't mocking himself? How do I know that he's actually denying Mulligan's assertion that he is being excessive with his grief? It's actually through context. Like if you just follow what is happening around that line, he is lost in the memory of nature with her toys. He is lost in the phantasmal mirth. And he repeats that line that is he brooding too much? Should he abandon it? And instead of abandoning all these memories, he actually dives further into empathy, further into understanding, further into his mother's perspective, thus suggesting that he's not aligning himself with Buck Mulligan, but rather rejecting Buck Mulligan, which is something he pretty obviously does in the chapter, and then instead diving further into empathy and understanding specifically with his mother, trying to understand where she is. And this is actually going to get elaborated a lot more throughout these first three chapters. So let's get back to where we started with this episode, Allusion and Joyce's mastery of it. When James Joyce makes allusions, your understanding of the text is entirely and genuinely dependent on you getting it as well as the layers. And what this does is it creates this puzzle, this layered puzzle that when it's solved, Ulysses reads like nothing else. So let me bring up Paradise Lost again, and just for comparison here. So let's say you were reading Paradise Lost and you had no understanding of biblical history or anything like that. You could probably get along. You might miss a lot of the biblical allusions, but you would still get a pretty good understanding of Satan, of Raphael, of Adam, of Eve. You would be able to understand the text on the whole okay. Now, you don't have to know that John Milton is actually following in this very Greek and ancient tradition of literature that's actually found in Dante's Inferno as well, of like referencing the muses and mixing the Christian mythology as well as like the Greco-Roman mythologies. You don't have to know. But if you do know that, it does help add additional layers of meaning to it, and it makes the text more rich. James Joyce, on the other hand, literally hinges the entire meaning and the plot of the novel on you understanding and unpacking these allusions. He places such a heavy burden and such a heavy expectation on you specifically as a reader for you not only to understand the original reference, but understand how Joyce recontextualizes it and then recontextualizes it and then recontextualizes it until all of a sudden there is an entire world that is developed around a single association of a line. And this is what James Joyce's high grade hot is. And this is this wonderful little joke that he plays on language and the reader. And this is what makes him unequivocally and inarguably the master of allusion. So this is Mostly Illiterate. I'm Pavel Tridiak. Thanks for listening. And if this has been a little bit much today, then no more turn aside and brood on Allusion's bitter mystery. Thank you, guys.